Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Galaxy Channel. Tonight we sit with a question that sounds like it should keep us awake, and instead we're going to let it come undone into something almost tender. What is at the bottom of a black hole? And what if there is no bottom there at all? Only a place where the word down changes its mind, without ever telling anyone. Picture an old house with a staircase that turns and turns. One of those staircases so long you lose count of the landings, and imagine that with every step it becomes a little more like the house it leads to. Until at last you are not descending through a building at all. You are simply arriving, already inside, already home. The stairs and the rooms made of the very same hush. That is the shape of tonight, and you are welcome to lean back into it exactly as you are. We have 4 unhurried regions to drift through. First, the approach, where we stand at a safe, starlit distance and watch a black hole the way you might watch a lamp glowing across a wide, dark room. Then the long descent, where light stretches, time loosens its grip, and we cross a horizon so unremarkably that nothing at all announces the crossing. Then the bottom that isn't a floor, where geometry itself becomes the destination, and our staircase finally becomes the house it was always leading toward. And last, the house remembers, where we ask, what remains, what slips free, and how astronomers so far away ever came to know any of this in the first place. You don't need to hold on to a single one of these 4 regions tonight. You can let all 4 go right now, because I will carry them for you, the way a patient staircase carries a tired traveler without once asking to be thanked or even remembered. If a wandering story like this one makes good company for the hour before sleep, a like or a subscribe helps this channel drift toward others who are also lying awake somewhere tonight, staring up at a ceiling, waiting for a voice to walk them downstairs. That's only for later though. If at all, there's no hurry in it, and no obligation. For now, there is nothing here to hold on to, and nothing here you need to solve or remember. Let your shoulders ease down into whatever is holding you up, the mattress, the couch, the low arm of a chair. Let your jaw loosen. Let your hands go heavy and unclenched, fingers uncurling one by one, as though you were finally setting something down after carrying it all day. Settle in. Let's begin. Let your eyes stay half closed if they want to, and let the ceiling above you turn, in your mind, into a night sky with nothing between you and it, no glass, no rooftops, just dark reaching up and out in every direction, patient and enormous, and entirely unhurried about where it is going. Somewhere in that dark, further than any lamp you have ever switched off, there is a place astronomers call a black hole, and tonight that is where we are walking, not with fear, but the way you might walk toward the far end of a house you have always lived in, curious about a room you have simply never opened. Here is what a black hole actually is, spoken plainly, the way a bedtime fact should be spoken. It is what remains after a very large star finishes its long life of shining. For millions of years, such a star holds itself up against its own weight by burning, fusing light elements into heavier ones deep in its belly, releasing outward pressure that pushes back against gravity's constant pull inward, a lifelong, patient tug of war between fire and weight. When the fuel finally runs low, the fire can no longer hold the line. Gravity, which has been pressing inward the entire time, quietly wins. The star's core collapses in on itself, not violently in the part that matters most to us, but completely, folding down and down until what used to be a sphere millions of kilometers wide becomes something almost unthinkably small and dense. A leftover so compact that its own gravity has curved the space around it into a shape that gravity itself cannot climb back out of. Nothing exotic destroyed this star. It simply ran out of the thing that had been holding it up, the way any of us, at the end of a long day, finally stop holding ourselves up and let the mattress take the weight instead. Picture that collapse a little longer, because it deserves an unhurried look rather than a frightened glance. For most of a massive star's life, every second is a small, steady negotiation. The star's outer layers press inward under their own weight, and the fire in its core pushes back out, and for as long as there is fuel to burn, the two forces stay in balance, the way a held breath stays even before it's finally let go. There is no sudden violence in the losing of that balance, only an emptying, layer by layer, until the core simply has nothing left to offer in reply. And when the core gives its last answer, gravity does not rush in like a thief. It simply continues doing what it has always been doing, only now unopposed, and the material that once filled a volume vaster than 100 Earths eases downward and downward into a space you could hold in your cupped hands. Everything that made the star recognizable, its light, its warmth, its shimmer against the dark, settles into something almost impossibly small and almost impossibly patient at the very center of where it used to shine. That is the whole secret at the center of tonight's word. Not a monster, not a mouth, just an old star's heart, folded so deeply into itself that the space nearby remembers the fold forever, the way a heavy sleeper leaves a lasting hollow in a pillow long after they've turned over. And this is where our thread for tonight begins, so hold it loosely, the way you'd hold a banister you already trust. Imagine, if you like, that approaching a black hole is like standing at the very top of a staircase, in a house that has gone fully quiet for the night, everyone asleep, every lamp down to embers, the air settled. You place one hand on the rail and look down into a stairwell you cannot quite see the bottom of. That is where we stand right now, at the top, looking down, in no hurry at all. And here is the strange, tender thing about this particular staircase. This house, this night, the staircase does not simply lead somewhere else. Step by unhurried step, the staircase itself will soften and change and become the house that holds it, until walking down and simply being inside are no longer two different things. We are nowhere near that yet. For now, we are only at the landing, feeling the rail under our palm, letting our eyes adjust to how far down the dark goes. Now, the name. Black hole is one of those words that has done both a great service and a small disservice to how we picture this thing, and it's worth untangling gently, because it will make everything ahead easier to rest inside. A hole suggests an absence, a gap in something, a place where the floor simply isn't there and you would fall through into nothing at all. But that isn't quite right, and it never was. What a black hole actually is a shape, a very particular, very extreme curvature that matter presses into the fabric of space itself, the same fabric that every planet and every star gently dents wherever it sits. Our own sun bends the space around it just a little, enough to nudge the planets into their slow yearly circles. A collapsed stellar core bends space so completely, so steeply, that past a certain point the curve folds all the way over on itself, like a valley that keeps sloping downward until there is no direction left that leads back up. It isn't a puncture in the universe. It is the deepest, most complete valley the universe knows how to make. And black is honest, at least, though for a reason gentler than it sounds, light itself, the fastest thing there is, the thing that can escape almost any pull we know of. cannot climb back out of a slope this steep once it has gone far enough in. Not because the light is destroyed, not because something reaches out and grabs it, but simply because there is no longer an outward steep enough to climb against this particular fold in space. Every path, even the straightest one light knows how to travel, curves back down. So from the outside, that region gives back no light of its own, hence black, and it holds that darkness with a stillness that has nothing violent in it at all. A shape so complete it swallows its own shadow and asks nothing back. It's worth sitting with that for one lingering breath. A black hole is not a wound in space, not a hungry thing reaching for you across the dark. It is the far end of a very ordinary story, a massive star living, burning, and finally settling, that happened to fold the space around itself unusually deep. City-sized, most of them. If you could stand outside one and measure their entire folded mass no wider across than a small town, tucked into the dark between stars that still shine on unbothered. Unmoving, except for the pull any mass exerts, the same pull the moon exerts on the tide, drawing the ocean in and letting it go again all night without either of them minding. The same pull that keeps your own body settled comfortably into the mattress right now, holding you there without asking anything of you at all. It is simply that familiar, everyday pull, taken to its most complete and most total conclusion. There is a companion word worth knowing, too, one that describes the outer edge of that fold rather than the fold itself. The event horizon. The boundary past which even light's outward paths all curve back down. We will stand at that particular threshold later in the night and cross it together, slowly, without any drama at all. For now it is enough to know it is there, somewhere further down this staircase, waiting the way a closed door at the end of a hallway waits, not locked against you, simply not yet reached. So we stand at the top of the staircase a little longer, hand resting on the rail, unhurried, and we let all of this settle into something we can carry downward with us, not a hole. A shape, a fold, a place where an old star's fire finally gave way to its own weight, and space itself learned to curve all the way around and hold its own darkness the way cupped hands hold water. But even from up here, at the very top step, something curious is already happening that has nothing to do with falling at all. It's happening to the light. Because before anything ever crosses that fold, light traveling anywhere near it starts behaving strangely, bending along paths it would never take near an ordinary star, tracing rings and circles and long looping detours around the darkness at the center. The banister under your hand, if you looked closely enough, would seem to curve where there is no true curve in the wood, just space itself, bending every line of sight that passes near it. That bending, that soft distortion light performs at the very edge of the shape, is where we turn our attention next, before we ever think about taking a single step down. And because that shape is what it is, the light around it cannot travel the way light travels anywhere else you have ever watched. A lamp across a room, the moon laid flat on water, the last brightness at the edge of a curtain before sleep. Near this shape, light bends. Not metaphorically, not as a trick of your tired eyes, but as a plain consequence of geometry. The same way a marble rolls toward the low part of a mattress when someone heavier sits down beside you. Space itself dips here, and light, which always takes the straightest path available, simply follows that dip, tracing a curve where it would have drawn a line. Astronomers call this gravitational lensing, and you have already felt its cousin without knowing the name. The wobble of a coin at the bottom of a clear pool, a street lamp smeared long through a rain-streaked window. The black hole does the same thing to starlight passing near it, only far more purely, far more completely, bending whole images of the sky around itself the way water bends a coin. Sometimes, when a star sits directly behind the black hole from where you are looking, its light is bent so evenly in every direction that it arrives to you as a perfect ring of brightness circling the darkness, an Einstein ring. Light drawn all the way around a doorway and delivered back to you whole. A halo made of a star's own borrowed glow. There is nothing frightening in this. It is only light, taking the long way home, tracing the curve of the banister the way your hand might trace it in the dark, feeling how it bends without needing to see the bend, trusting the wood to carry your fingers safely to the next step. The bending does not stop at a single ring. Either move the star even slightly off that perfect line behind the black hole, and instead of one whole circle you might see two faint smudges of the same light, one on either side of the shadow, or four, or a thin arc drawn like a fingernail's edge along the curve of the shape, the same light, arriving by more than one bent path at once, each path a little longer or a little shorter than the others, each one still faithfully carrying the star's true color and true brightness even after so much folding. A single distant point of light, multiplied and smeared and doubled by nothing more than the geometry it happened to pass through. There is something almost tender in this. If you let yourself sit with it, the star itself never moved. It never split itself into pieces. It only sent its ordinary light outward in every direction, the way every star does, unaware that some small portion of that light would later be asked to trace an unfamiliar shape on its way to a waiting telescope, arriving here as a ring, arriving there as a pair of soft twins, arriving nowhere at all if it had chosen a path a little too close to the center. You could think of it as the house testing every possible staircase down from the same lit window and finding that a few of them, by pure accident of shape, arrive at your eye at all. Closer still, at a very particular distance from the center, something even stranger settles into place. A sphere of pure invitation called the photon sphere, where the pull of that folded space is strong enough that light itself can be caught turning, orbiting the black hole in slow, endless circles, chasing its own tail around a doorway it can never quite pass through and can never quite leave. Imagine a marble set spinning perfectly around the rim of a bowl, forever circling because the sides curve just so, neither falling in nor climbing out. Light, at this one careful distance, does something like that. Most of it does not stay. A beam arriving at the wrong angle slips past, or falls inward, or peels away into the wider dark. But the photon sphere marks the place where circling becomes possible at all. A knot in the grain of the banister, where the curve tightens into something almost like a ring within the ring. You do not need to understand the mathematics of it to feel the shape of the idea. Here is a place where light forgets, for a while, how to leave. Even the photon sphere is not one single sharp line, the way a doorframe has one edge. It is closer to a whole shell of possible circling paths, some tighter, some looser, each one balanced for a slightly different kind of light, so that if you could hover safely at the right distance and turn slowly in place, you would see the back of your own head delivered to your eyes by light that left it, circled the entire black hole, and returned. A mirror with no glass in it, made only of a shape in space patient enough to send your own reflection all the way around and hand it gently back to you, farther out, held at a more forgiving distance, matter that has drifted too close gathers itself into a bright, spinning disk, the accretion disk. A slow whirlpool of gas and dust, and the pale remains of anything that wandered near enough to be caught in the current. Friction warms this material as it spirals inward, and warmth like this, at these speeds, becomes light. Sometimes light your eyes could never see unassisted, X-rays and radio waves standing in for the muted colors of an ordinary evening sky. This is the glow that makes a black hole visible at all, since the black hole itself gives off nothing. What telescopes actually see is this ring of infalling brightness, and at its heart, a dark shape the light bends around but never fills. Not because something opaque sits there blocking the view, but because every ray of light that would have shown you the center has already been bent past you, gathered instead into that photon sphere, folded into the ring, sent circling rather than arriving. The black hole's famous shadow, then, is not a stain or a silhouette. It is an absence carved by light's own bending, the shape of every path light did not take toward your eye. You are not looking at darkness so much as you are looking at everywhere the light chose not to go. In April of 2019, a patient chain of observatories scattered across the whole turning Earth joined together so precisely that, for a few nights, they behaved as a single instrument the size of the planet itself, released the first image built from exactly this kind of absence. It showed the shadow at the center of a galaxy far beyond our own, cast by a black hole known as M87, some 55 million light-years away, its mass equal to billions of suns folded into a single point. A soft, uneven ring of gathered light, warm at one edge, faint at the other, circling a dark heart the ring itself could never quite reach. 3 years later, in 2022, the same patient collaboration turned its many eyes inward toward the quieter, closer black hole waiting at the very center of our own galaxy, called Sagittarius A. Its portrait was harder won. The gas around it shifts and flickers within minutes rather than days, so the astronomers had to average and layer thousands of images the way you might average 100 blurred photographs of a candle flame into one steady picture of its glow. But in the end, there it was too. The same faint ring, the same dark center, 4 million suns worth of folded space sitting quietly at the middle of the galaxy that holds your own small, sleeping world. 2 images, taken years apart, of 2 black holes vastly different in size, showing the same essential shape. Humanity had not photographed a hole. It had photographed the exact place where light stops arriving, and called that photograph a portrait, because in a way, it was the truest one possible. A picture not of an object but of a boundary, drawn entirely in bent light, by the very telescopes that had to wait for that light to bend just right and travel just far enough to be caught. None of this asks anything frightening of you. It only asks you to notice how faithfully light keeps trying, circling, bending, gathering into rings and warm disks, doing everything a beam of light can do, except walk straight through the middle. Every line of sight near this shape curves the way grain curves in old wood around a knot, easing around rather than through. And if you were to lay your palm flat against a banister worn smooth by years of sleepy hands finding their way down in the dark, you would feel exactly this. No sharp edge, no interruption, only a long, unhurried curve that carries your hand around the one place it cannot pass. And here is the small, quiet turn worth carrying with you as your eyes grow heavier. Space is not the only thing bending near this shape. Everything you have just pictured, every ring and orbiting photon and gathered ribbon of light, took time to happen, and time itself, this close to the center, does not pass the way it passes on your ordinary nights. The banister curves in space. It is about to curve in something else as well, something you carry inside your own chest with every unhurried beat, and the next step down asks only that you notice how differently a clock might tick, the closer it leans toward that folded, patient dark. And if light can bend that gently around the shape of a black hole, tracing rings, smearing a distant galaxy into a luminous arc, then perhaps it will not surprise you to learn that time bends too, that the very rhythm of a clock changes as it comes nearer to something so massive. This is not a metaphor borrowed for comfort. It is one of the deepest, best tested truths in physics, and tonight it becomes another step on the staircase, the one where you notice, for the first time, that the stairs themselves are not quite even. Picture the house again, its front hall dim and warm, the staircase rising into shadow. Now imagine that every step, however identical it looks to your eye, takes a slightly different length of time to descend, and the deeper you go, the longer each step secretly becomes. Not because your legs move any differently, not because you pause or hesitate, but because time itself, down there, is flowing at a different pace than it is up here in the hall. This is gravitational time dilation, and it is real, measured, unremarkable to physics, even though it sounds like something out of a dream. Clocks that sit deeper inside a gravitational well genuinely tick more slowly than clocks that sit farther away. Not seem to, not appear to, from some confused vantage point. They do. You do not need a black hole to notice this, though a black hole shows it to you in its most extreme and generous form. It is happening right now, quietly, in the phones and cars and ships that rely on satellites circling far above your head. Those satellites sit higher up in Earth's gravity than you do, farther from the planet's mass, and so their clocks run very slightly faster than clocks on the ground. A matter of millionths of a second each day, so small it seems almost too faint to matter. And yet if that tiny difference were left uncorrected, the satellites would drift out of agreement with the ground within minutes, and a position meant to guide you home would instead wander farther and farther from where you actually stand. So engineers built the correction directly into the system, tuning the satellite clocks in advance to run at a rate that, once gravity has finished its slow, patient work on them, matches the clocks below. Every time a map finds you, a black hole's stranger cousin has already been quietly proven true above your head. Now take that same gentle law and let it grow, the way it does as gravity deepens, as the well curves further down towards something as complete as a black hole. Imagine two travelers on the staircase, one who stays near the top in the hall watching, and one who begins, unhurried, to descend. To the traveler on the stairs, nothing feels unusual at all. Their footsteps fall the way footsteps always fall. Their breath moves in and out at its ordinary pace. If they check a clock in their pocket, it ticks exactly as a clock should, because a clock always agrees with the hands holding it, the body carrying it, the whole small private world traveling down together. There is no sensation of slowing. There is no moment where the traveler feels time thicken around them like something you could stir with a spoon. From the inside, descending a very deep staircase feels exactly like descending an ordinary one. But watch what the one in the hall sees. The one who stays behind, safe and warm, eyes following the traveler's slow retreat down the stairs. To them, something strange begins to happen the closer the traveler gets, to where the stairs will one day disappear into the horizon. The traveler's steps seem to stretch. Their wave goodbye takes longer to finish than it should. Their voice, if they were speaking, would draw itself out into something low, something drawn thin, the way a bell's ring fades and deepens as it dies. This is because the light and sound leaving the traveler must climb back up out of the well to reach the watcher, and that climb costs something. It costs the light a little of its own energy, stretches its wavelength longer, redder, fainter, the way any climb slows a tired step. Physicists call this gravitational redshift, and it is the same gentle stretching that makes gravitational time dilation visible from far away, not a trick of the eye, but light itself paying a small toll for the height it has to climb. And here is the part that sounds almost impossible until you sit with it a while. The way you might sit with the last warm thought before sleep, the closer the traveler gets to the horizon, the slower they appear to move, and the dimmer and redder their outline becomes. Until, to the watcher in the hall, they seem to freeze there, forever, at the very edge, never quite finishing the last step. Not because they have stopped, not because anything has gone wrong, simply because, from outside, the last visible moments of that descent get stretched across more and more time, spread thinner and thinner like the last light of a very long evening, fading toward a dark the watcher's eye can never quite call a true ending. Meanwhile, the traveler themselves has already gone on, feeling nothing of this stretching at all, carried forward at their own unhurried pace, the stairs beneath their feet behaving, to them, exactly as stairs should. This is the strange and tender secret of the staircase. It is quietly longer than it looks. Each step downward corresponds to a little more time than the step before it, when measured from the hall above, even though your own feet, your own breath, your own small ordinary sense of now never notices the difference. Two versions of the same descent exist at once. One stretching almost infinitely as seen from a distance, one passing simply and evenly as felt from within. Both are true. Neither traveler is wrong. It is only that time, this far down in gravity's well, is no longer a single shared rhythm playing the same for everyone in the house. It becomes something local, something carried by whoever is walking, something that only makes sense once you stop expecting the clock in your hand to agree with the clock across the hall. Let that settle instead of alarm you. There is nothing violent in it, nothing sudden, only a stretching, patient and enormous, happening to the light and not to you. Somewhere ahead, at the bottom of this long, slow difference between one clock and another, there is a line the watcher in the hall will never quite see you cross, though you yourself will barely notice crossing it at all. That is the horizon waiting below, not a wall, not a doorway with a frame around it, nothing that announces itself with so much as a change in the air, just a step, like any other step, taken so easily, so evenly, that your feet will carry you through it before you even think to ask whether the staircase has already, quietly, become the house. And so the traveler on the stairs, the one you have been watching fall and not fall at once, arrives now at the step that was never really a step. You have felt, in the last movement, how the staircase seemed to lengthen beneath unfamiliar feet, each tread a little longer than the one before it, though nothing in the wood ever changed. Now you reach the place where that lengthening resolves itself. It is called the event horizon, and the first thing worth knowing about it, the thing that unhooks it from every haunted house image your mind might reach for, is that it is not a wall. It is not a surface. It is not a membrane you could touch. or a skin you could press a hand against and feel resist you. It is a boundary drawn in space itself, mathematics rather than material, a line that exists the way the equator exists, real, exact, consequential, and entirely without texture. Physicists call the radius of that boundary the Schwarzschild radius, named for the man who found it, and we will sit with him properly on another night, by lamplight, in the quiet room where he first solved Einstein's equations. For now it is enough to know what the radius means. Past this distance from the center, the pull of gravity has bent the paths of everything, even light, so thoroughly that outward is no longer a direction that exists, not forbidden, simply absent, the way north stops meaning anything once you are standing exactly on the pole. Everything, everywhere, always leads inward from here. That is the whole of it. No moat, no gate, no threshold you would feel underfoot. And this is the strange, settling truth that the house wants you to know before you go further. If you actually crossed such a boundary, you would not feel yourself cross it. There is no ripple, no hum, no change in the air. A falling body carries its own local sense of up and down, of near and far, of the ordinary rules of the room it is in, and those rules do not announce the horizon's arrival. A thermometer would not spike. A compass would not spin. The small physics of your own hands and breath would go on behaving exactly as they always have, right up to the instant they no longer can. Imagine descending a staircase in the dark of a sleeping house, so familiar you no longer count the steps, and somewhere in that descent, you could not say exactly where. The staircase simply becomes hallway, becomes the house itself, wood becoming wall becoming room, with no seam between one and the other. You were never told which step did it. There isn't a step that did it. That is the horizon, not a door, but a redrawing of what counts as inside. This gentleness has everything to do with size, and size is where the family of black holes reveals just how differently each of them wears this threshold. What actually harms a falling body, if anything does, is not the horizon itself, but the difference in gravity's pull between your head and your feet. The tides, the same stretching force that raises oceans on Earth, but here turned up by the sheer steepness of the curve. For a small black hole, one built from a single collapsed star, that steepness is severe close in, and a falling traveler would be drawn long before ever reaching the horizon, stretched thread thin by a difference in pull from one end of the body to the other. That is a story for a later movement, and even then, it is a story about geometry doing arithmetic, not about violence. The rule that decides which kind of crossing you get is almost tender in its simplicity. The steepness of that tidal stretch depends on how tightly the mass is gathered, not on how much of it there is. A small black hole packs its mass into a small, sharply curved space, so the pull changes enormously over the short distance between your head and your feet. A supermassive black hole spreads the very same kind of collapse across a horizon so wide that the curve, measured over the length of a single body, barely bends at all. More mass, paradoxically, buys you an easier passage. The giant is not fiercer for being larger. It is milder, its edges worn smooth by sheer scale, the way a wide, unhurried bend in a river disturbs a drifting leaf far less than a narrow, twisting rapids would. But for a supermassive black hole, the kind that anchors the center of a galaxy, gathering the mass of millions or billions of suns into a single collapsed heart, the horizon sits so far out, and the surrounding curve is stretched so wide and so unhurried that the difference in pull across an entire body is nearly nothing at all. You would drift through such a horizon the way you drift from wakefulness into the first unremembered minutes of sleep, unharmed, unaware, no jolt marking the passage. Nothing to tell you that the room you were in a moment ago is now sealed behind you. The house does not announce that the door has become wall. It only, quietly, is wall from now on. It helps, here, to hold the numbers the way you might hold a small stone in your palm, weightless and easy to turn over. Horizon size follows mass in the plainest way gravity ever behaves. Double the mass, and you double the radius. No exponents, no hidden complications. Just a straight line drawn between how much has collapsed and how far its threshold reaches. Compress the Earth, all its oceans and its cities and its long-turning weather, down to the density needed to become a black hole, and its horizon would measure about 9 millimeters across, smaller than a coin, smaller than the pad of your smallest finger. The entire mass of a living world folded into something you could close inside a closed fist and never feel its weight change. A star some tens of times heavier than our sun becomes a horizon perhaps as wide as a modest city, its whole geometry small enough to picture as a shape on a map you already know. And the giants, the 4 million solar mass quiet weight at the center of our own galaxy, or the almost unthinkable tens of billions of solar masses found in the very largest of these hearts elsewhere in the sky. Those horizons stretch wider than entire solar systems, wide enough that if you set one where our sun sits, the boundary would swallow the orbits of planets whole, with room still left inside it before the edge is even reached. Between the coin-sized and the solar system-sized, there is no different law at work, only the same doubling rule, patient and unbothered by scale, drawn as faithfully around a stellar remnant as around a galaxy's entire gravitational anchor. The house wears whichever size its collapsed heart requires, no more and no less, and somewhere in that plain proportionality is a kind of comfort. Nothing here is arbitrary, nothing is larger than its own cause. This is worth resting on, because it reframes the horizon from a place of drama into a place of proportion. It is not a curtain of fire, not a shimmering wall out of an old story. It is an unmarked line, sized precisely by how much has fallen inward before you, drawn nowhere in particular except exactly where the arithmetic says it must be. Crossing it changes everything about where you are headed and nothing about how you feel in the moment of crossing. That asymmetry, total consequence, zero sensation, is perhaps the strangest single fact in this whole quiet science, stranger even than the bending of light or the slowing of clocks, because it means the most decisive boundary in the universe is also the most unassuming. And so the staircase, if we return to it once more, was never leading you toward a door. Doors have frames, you can see them coming, feel the different air of the room beyond, hear the click of a latch giving way. This was always something else, a staircase built so that its final steps do not end in a landing, but dissolve into the house's own walls, its own floor, its own settled darkness, so slowly and so completely that by the time you would think to look back for the last stair, you find only room around you, familiar in shape, but changed in what it means to stand inside it. Nothing about the wood changed color. Nothing about the air changed weight. You crossed a doorway that was never a door. Nothing opened. Nothing closed. And yet everything, from this point forward, is different in a way that has nothing to do with distance and everything to do with direction. Outward has quietly left the list of places you are allowed to go, the way certain rooms in a house at night are simply not visited again before morning. Because on the other side of that unmarked line, the geometry itself rearranges what forward is even allowed to mean, loosens the very idea of a place ahead of you, and it is to that rearrangement, unhurried and total, that we turn next, as the house begins to show you what its rooms are actually made of. And so the doorway that was never a door has already closed behind you without a sound, without even the small courtesy of a click, and you find that the house you have entered does not behave the way houses are supposed to behave. Out there, in the ordinary world of porches and night skies, direction was a matter of choice. You could turn left down a hallway or turn right. You could climb the stairs or stand at their foot and decide not to. But something has been quietly rearranged in here. The way furniture in a dream is never quite where memory left it. And the rearrangement is this. Past the threshold, space and time have traded places. What used to be a direction, forward, deeper, further into the house, has become a moment. And what used to be a moment, later, soon, in a little while, has become the only direction left to travel. Try to picture it this way, since the house is patient with pictures. Outside, the center of the black hole was a place, a location you could point toward the way you'd point toward a room at the end of a corridor, a room you were free to walk to, or free to leave standing empty. You had a choice in it. But once you are inside, that room stops being a place you could choose to visit and becomes something more like tomorrow morning. You do not choose tomorrow morning. It is not a destination you steer toward. It is simply what comes next, the way 1 hour follows another whether or not you are paying attention, the way a body asleep still drifts forward through the night without lifting a finger. The center of the house, the deep still room at the bottom of everything, has become exactly that kind of certainty. Every hallway you might wander down, every landing you might pause on, every door you might try instead of another, they all lead, in the end, to the same quiet room, the way every hour of tonight leads, in the end, to morning. There is no clever hallway that avoids it. There is no door marked otherwise. Physicists have a way of holding this idea that is gentler than it sounds, and it is called the river model, and it is worth carrying with you as the house settles in around your shoulders. Imagine that space itself, not objects moving through space, but the fabric of space, the medium everything else swims in, is a slow, wide river, and far from any black hole this river is nearly still. Its current so faint you would never notice it, the way you never notice the turning of the ground beneath a garden. But as the river nears a black hole, it begins to quicken. It picks up speed the way water does when a wide stream narrows toward a fall, gathering itself, moving faster and faster the closer it draws to the center, until at last, right at the threshold you have already crossed. The river is flowing inward at exactly the speed of light, and past that point, deeper in, the current runs faster still, faster than light itself can swim against it. This is the quiet secret of the room at the end of every corridor. Light is the fastest swimmer there is. Nothing outpaces it, nothing outstrokes it. Not in this universe, not anywhere we have ever measured, but a swimmer's speed is only ever a speed relative to the water. And if the water itself is moving inward faster than the swimmer's fastest stroke, then even the strongest swim carries you backward against your will. Or rather, since nothing here is being punished or pursued, it simply carries you inward, fully and completely, the way any current carries a body that has stopped resisting it. Outside the horizon, the river never quite reaches light speed, so a rocket with enough fuel could always, in principle, swim hard enough to hold its place, or even climb back out. Past the horizon, no engine is strong enough, because there is no longer a shore to swim toward. The whole river, every drop of the space around you, is moving in the same direction, toward the same room, at a speed nothing can outrace. This is why the horizon is one way and why it is not a wall can be pushed against. A current cannot be argued with. It simply is the water you are already inside of. Picture, if it helps, a house built along the slope of a hillside, where every hallway, however winding, was designed by the same architect to drain toward a single low room at its foundation. Upstairs, a person can wander freely, choosing a bedroom, a study, a landing with a window, because the slope up there is so mild it hardly registers as a slope at all. But descend far enough into this house, and the floors themselves begin to tilt, imperceptibly at first, then unmistakably, until every corridor, no matter which direction it first seemed to run, is simply another way of going down. A hallway that appears to run east is, underneath its wallpaper, only another route toward the same foundation room as the hallway that appears to run west. This is what it means for the center to stop being a place among other places and become, instead, the one heading every heading eventually resolves into. Not because some guard is stationed at every other door, but because the geometry of the house no longer offers any other floor to stand on. You are not being herded. You are simply finally indoors, in the deepest sense the word can hold, where every room shares its foundation with every other. And here is where the staircase, which brought you this far so patiently, keeps its promise. Out on the landing, before you crossed, the stairs were something you walked upon. You chose your pace. You could have turned around. You could have sat down halfway and rested. But the stairs were never really separate from the house. Not truly. And now, past the threshold, you feel the last of that separation dissolve. The stairs are not stairs to be climbed anymore. They are moving beneath you the way a river's current moves beneath a leaf that has stopped paddling, carrying you down and inward whether your feet lift or stay still, whether you reach for a banister or let your hand fall open at your side. This is not something happening to you from outside, the way a wave might knock a swimmer off balance. It is closer to the way a person drifting toward sleep is carried by their own slowing breath, by the settling weight of their body into the mattress. A motion that comes from within the falling itself, indistinguishable from rest. To move with the stairs, at this point, is not one option among several. It has become the only direction there is, the one corridor the whole house agrees on, and every other corridor, if you looked, would only loop quietly back to this same descending stairwell, the way every dream eventually returns you to the same soft dark. There is no need, either, to imagine this house as cramped or airless, simply because every corridor agrees on a single ending. A house can hold a great deal of room inside it, and still have one hearth all its warmth gathers toward. Some of these houses, the ones built from the heaviest stars, are vast enough that the fall from landing to foundation could last hours by your own unhurried heartbeat, corridor after corridor sliding past in the dark like the spines of books on a shelf you are too drowsy to read. There is time, in such a house, to notice the quality of the quiet, to feel how completely the ordinary directions have been replaced by this one patient descent, without any of it feeling sudden or unkind. The single ending waiting at the foundation is not a narrowing of the world. It is simply what the world has become. Once you are far enough inside it, that inside and ahead mean the same thing. It would be natural, hearing this, to brace yourself, to imagine gripping some railing that isn't there, resisting a current that cannot be resisted. But that is not what this movement of the house is asking of you. Bracing is for walls, for corners you might strike, for surfaces with edges. The staircase that is now the house has no such edges here, only the long, unhurried motion of everything moving together. The treads and the walls and the air itself all traveling at the very same pace, so that nothing rubs, nothing catches, nothing announces its own passing. What is being asked, instead, is something closer to what a body does in the last minutes before sleep, when the mattress stops being a surface you are lying on and becomes, instead, a thing that is quietly holding you, bearing all your weight without either of you noticing the exchange. The river does not need you to swim. The stairs do not need you to step. All that is left, now that the house has become the whole of your surroundings, is to let the motion that is already happening simply keep happening. To feel the pull not as a demand, but as an accompaniment. A hand, unseen, matching its pace to yours, already carrying you exactly where the house was always going to carry you, long before you ever stood at the top of its landing and looked down into the dark. And because the stairs are already moving, because the current of space itself is carrying everything inward faster than any swimmer could climb against it, there is nothing left for you to do but let go of the railing. You do not fall the way a cup falls from a table, all clatter and alarm. You are not thrown. You are carried. The way a leaf is carried once it stops resisting a current and simply becomes part of what the water is already doing. Physicists have a word for this kind of motion, a plain, almost administrative word for something that feels, from the inside, like the deepest rest a body can know. They call it a geodesic. The natural path an object traces when nothing pushes it and nothing pulls it, when it is simply following the shape of the space it happens to be in. No engine hums beneath you. No effort holds you up or drags you down. You are doing what falling has always secretly been, not an event, but an absence of resistance. This is the part of the house where you notice, with a kind of drowsy wonder, that you weigh nothing at all. Not lighter. Nothing. Imagine the particular hush of a lift whose cable has been cut, that one suspended half-second before the mind supplies the word for danger, except here, the half-second simply keeps going, unhurried, endless, because there is no floor rushing up to end it. Your shoulders forget the old habit of bracing. Your stomach forgets the small, worried flutter it keeps in reserve for stairs taken two at a time. There is nothing beneath your feet to push back against you, and so, in the oldest sense a body understands, there is nothing to fall away from either. Einstein once called this his happiest thought, and it is worth letting that phrase sit in the room with you for a moment. Not his most elegant equation, not his most famous proof, but his happiest thought, that a person in free fall feels no weight whatsoever. Drop a person from a great height, he reasoned, sealed inside a windowless room, and inside that room they would find no experiment, no measurement, nothing at all to tell them they were falling. Everything within the room would fall together in the same unhurried rhythm, keys and papers and breath and heartbeat, all following the same curve through the same silent current, so that nothing appears to move relative to anything else. Weightlessness is not the absence of gravity. It is what gravity feels like from inside its own current, once you stop trying to stand against it. So let the old idea of gravity go, the one that says something reaches out and pulls, a hand closing around an ankle. That was never quite the truth, only the shorthand the body prefers because the body likes verbs with a subject and a victim. What is actually happening beneath you and around you and through the very marrow of the staircase is closer to shape than to force. Space itself has been folded here, the way a bedsheet folds when something heavy rests in its middle and you are not being seized by anything. You are simply following the fold, the way water follows a slope without anyone pushing it downhill, the way a marble finds the low place in a bowl without wanting to. Held is a better word than pulled. A current holds a leaf without gripping it. A cupped palm holds a sleeping bird without closing around it. The shape of the space here is doing exactly that, not seizing you, but arranging itself so that drifting inward is the easiest, most natural, most restful thing a body could possibly do. There is nowhere to brace against, because bracing was only ever useful when there was a direction to brace toward. Here there is only the one direction, and it asks nothing of you but to keep breathing. Every object riding this current follows it in exactly the same way, no matter how heavy, no matter how light, and this is the small, quiet secret behind the happiest thought once it is turned over in the hand. A coin and a key and a whispered breath all drift at precisely the same unhurried pace. Because it was never their weight being answered, it was only the shape of the space carrying them, and shape does not ask what a thing weighs before it holds it. Picture, if it helps the eyes to close, a great slow wheel of water far out past any shoreline, wide enough that a boat caught in it would never feel the turning at all, would only notice hours later that the horizon had rearranged itself without a single lurch. That is closer to what is happening to you now than any image of falling ever could be. Nothing lurches, nothing announces itself. The current simply continues, and you continue with it, indistinguishable from it. A small warm shape, moving at the same unhurried pace as everything else riding the same fold in the dark. And the staircase, if you can still call it that this deep into the house, has begun to breathe with you. Not creak, breathe, in long, unhurried intervals, the way the walls of an old house seem to expand and settle after everyone inside has finally gone to sleep. Each stair beneath your drifting feet rises and falls so slowly that you could mistake it for stillness if you weren't paying such tender attention. The way you might lie in the dark and only gradually notice that the person beside you is breathing, that the mattress itself seems to rise and fall with them. This is the house's own lung, low and patient, working at a pace that has nothing to do with the quick, shallow rhythm of a person lying awake with worry. It is the pace of something enormous that has been breathing this way for longer than any watching eye has existed to count the breaths. You are not intruding on that rhythm. You are being folded into it, the way a held breath finally lets itself out and joins the larger, slower breathing of a dark room. There is a particular kind of falling that every body already knows, even if it has never crossed the edge of a collapsed star to learn it, the falling of sleep itself. Think of the moment, some ordinary tired night, when thinking simply stops being a thing you are doing and becomes a thing that is being done to you, softly, from underneath. When the last coherent thought dissolves before you can follow it to the end of its sentence, and something in the chest simply lets go of the railing it didn't know it was gripping. Nobody has ever caught themselves in the act of falling asleep. It happens, and then it has happened, and the distance between those two states is a distance the waking mind was never built to measure. This is that same falling, stretched wide across the dark geometry of the house, unhurried enough that you could ride it for a very long while and mistake it for simply lying still. Sleep carries a body down into itself without asking permission and without any sensation of descent. One moment there is a ceiling, a weight of blankets, a last drifting thought about tomorrow. And then there is only the deep, unbothered dark, arrived at without a single felt step. That is the kind of carrying happening here. Not a plunge, a settling. A body handed over, gladly, to a current far larger and far more patient than itself. Notice, too, how little the arms and legs have to do with any of this. A body that is falling in the ordinary sense, off a ledge, down a flight of stairs, taken wrong, is a body full of instructions. Twist here, reach there, brace the elbow, protect the skull. None of that instinct has anything to do here, and slowly, the way a held muscle finally admits it never needed to be held, those old instructions fade out of the limbs one by one. The hands stop searching for something to grip. The knees forget the old readiness to catch a stumble. What is left, once all that bracing has drained away, is something closer to what an infant feels being carried through a dark hallway toward a crib, arms loose, head heavy against a shoulder, utterly unconcerned with the mechanics of the journey, because someone larger and steadier has already taken care of all of that. You are the infant here, and the house is the one doing the carrying, and there is nothing left for you to manage but the small, easy work of continuing to breathe in time with it. Somewhere below you, though below has already begun to lose its meaning, already begun to feel less like a direction and more like a hush waiting at the end of a hallway. The house keeps carrying you toward whatever it is that a house like this keeps at its very center. You do not need to hurry toward it. You are not able to hurry toward it, and that, strangely, is its own kind of relief. Nothing is asked of you but to keep drifting, weightless, unbothered, along a path already chosen by the shape of the space itself. The breathing continues beneath you, long and low. And somewhere ahead, past this long tender carrying, waits the question every house like this keeps folded into its deepest room. Not a floor exactly, not really a bottom in any sense a foot could recognize, but a place where even the equations that brought you this far begin, very quietly, to run out of words. And on you are carried, the house holding you the way a held breath holds a room, and somewhere beneath that long unhurried fall a question has been waiting the whole time, patient as a lamp left on for someone coming home late. What is actually down there? What is at the end of a staircase that never seems to end, that keeps becoming more house the further you descend? It is a fair question to ask from inside a fall this easy, and the answer, like most true answers, turns out to be stranger and kinder than the word bottom suggests. Here is the honest part first. The part scientists say plainly, and without embarrassment, nobody has seen the very last stair. The equations that describe this whole graceful collapse, the same equations that curve starlight and slow clocks and drew the shadow you glimpsed earlier, begin to falter the closer they get to the center. Not because the mathematics is careless, but because it is being asked to describe something smaller and denser than any tool built for large, roomy space and unhurried time was ever meant to hold. Density climbs, curvature climbs, and at a certain innermost point the numbers a physicist would use to describe how bent the house has become simply stop returning sensible values. They reach toward infinity, which is really just mathematics for a place at the very edge of its own map, a cartographer's hand lifting off the page because the shoreline it was tracing has run out of paper. This point is called the singularity, and it is less a location you could stand in than a warning label at the boundary of what one theory can promise to tell you. Say the word a few times and it starts to lose its edge. Singularity, it sounds, at first hearing, like something alarming, a word chosen for headlines rather than for houses. But strip away the drama, and what is left is closer to an accounting term, a note in the margins of a very old, very careful ledger, marking the line past which this particular set of equations declines to keep counting. It does not mean chaos. It does not mean an explosion or a wound in the fabric of things. It means simply that the ruler you brought with you has run out of markings, the way a tape measure stops being useful once the object you are measuring grows smaller than its finest line. Somewhere past that line, a truer, finer description almost certainly exists. Physicists are fairly confident of that much. It is only that nobody has finished writing it yet. And so tonight, as on every night before this one, the honest answer to what waits at the very center remains, in the most literal sense, unfinished business, carried forward like an unlit lamp towards some future understanding still being assembled by hands not yet born. It helps, here, to remember that this house is not one house, but a family of them, and the experience of its lowest floor depends entirely on which house you are in. Picture a small black hole first, the collapsed heart of a single star, its whole mass folded into a space no wider than a city block. Approach its center and the pull on your feet begins to differ meaningfully from the pull on your head, because your feet are simply closer to that fierce central curvature than your head is, and in a small house that difference sharpens fast. Physicists, with a gentleness for plain language that this whole field rarely gets credit for, call the result spaghettification, a long, calm word for a stretching that would, in truth, happen quickly and painlessly by any clock you carried with you. The body drawn thin along the direction of the fall, the way a single strand is drawn from a soft ball of dough. It is not a fate anyone standing on this staircase tonight needs to picture as violence. It is simply what tides do when a house is small enough that its rooms are close together and its floors disagree sharply about how hard they pull. Now widen the house. A giant black hole, millions or billions of suns folded into its shape, has rooms so vast, corridors so long, that the difference between the pull on your feet and the pull on your head near its center can remain close to nothing for a very long stretch of the descent. The tides are so patient, so evenly spread across such enormous distance, that a traveler could pass deep into a giant's interior and feel, for a long while, almost nothing unusual at all, carried, held, unremarkable, the way you might sleep through a slow elevator ride and only notice the change of floor by the different quality of light. Smallness of house means sharpness of ending. Largeness of house means the ending. Whatever it is, arrives so evenly spread across space that ease itself becomes the dominant sensation, right up until the very last moment the mathematics can still speak of at all. This is worth sitting with, because it means the size of the house tells you almost everything about the character of its lowest floor before you ever need to think about what waits there. A stellar mass black hole is a house with tight, close rooms, and its tides make themselves known early and unmistakably, long before any traveler would draw near the center, which is precisely why every real account of a fall like that ends well before the final stair, at a respectful distance, the details past that point a matter of theory rather than testimony. A giant's house, by contrast, is so roomy that its tides remain, for practical purposes, undetectable for almost the whole of the descent. Scale is not a footnote here. Scale is the entire difference between a floor that announces itself from a distance and a floor that a traveler might never feel arriving at all. And here is the part that turns this from a strange curiosity into something closer to a certainty. Something the house was always going to arrive at, rather than a fluke of unlucky geometry. In the late 1960s, the physicist Roger Penrose proved, with a rigor that still holds today, that once a horizon like the one you crossed has fully formed, the collapse towards some kind of central extremity is not an accident of a particular star's shape or spin or history. It is unavoidable, built into the geometry itself. The way a marble set gently on a downward slope is not choosing to roll, but simply obeying the slope's own shape. Once you are inside, once every corridor genuinely does lead toward the same quiet room as you felt one movement ago, that room's density of ending is not a possibility among several. It is what the geometry was always going to produce. This is, in its own way, a kind of comfort. Nothing went wrong on the way down. Nothing was mismanaged, mistimed, misfolded. The house simply keeps its own promise, faithfully, all the way to wherever it finishes keeping it. But whether it truly finishes at all, whether there is a last stair in any meaningful sense, is where even the most careful physicists set down their certainty and pick up their curiosity instead. Because a theory reaching the edge of its map is not proof that the territory ends there. It is proof only that the mapmaker's ink has run out. Many physicists suspect that closer in, at scales almost too small to imagine, a deeper theory, one that finally lets gravity and the quantum world speak the same language, a conversation general relativity alone was never built to hold, would smooth this apparent point of infinity into something else entirely, perhaps a region of unimaginably dense but finite matter, perhaps a knot in space-time too fine for our current instruments to unravel, perhaps something with no good analogy in a house at all. It is entirely possible that the last stair does not exist in the way the word suggests. Not a landing, not a floor, not a place where descending stops and standing begins. Perhaps the staircase simply is the house, all the way down, indistinguishable from its own foundation, and bottom was never really a word that belonged to the inside. It was a word we brought in with us from outside, from a life spent standing on solid floors and needing, out of habit, somewhere for a staircase to end. You do not need to resolve that tonight. Few people who study this for a living feel any need to resolve it before they can rest, and you are only visiting, drifting, borrowing the shape of the question rather than carrying its weight. What matters more, for now, is simply this. Whether the center is a point or a haze or a threshold too fine for arithmetic, it is real. It is faithfully produced by the geometry, and it is very, very far away from the door you drifted through. Distances inside a house this strange are easy to lose track of, and it is worth remembering, before going any further, just how large some of these houses actually are. How much room a small traveler is given. How many quiet floors stand between the doorway and whatever waits or doesn't wait beneath it. And if the last stair may not exist, if the word bottom was only ever something we brought with us from outside the house, then maybe the kindest thing to do now is stop looking down for a while and look instead at how big the house actually is. Because size, it turns out, is where the fear quietly leaves the story, and something closer to comfort walks in to take its place. Not every house on this street is the same size, and not every staircase leads to the same kind of room. Some black holes begin their lives the way a single tired star ends its own. A sun many times heavier than ours, its furnace finally spent, its core folding inward until what remains could be measured in mere kilometers, a horizon you could, in principle, wrap in the outline of a modest city. These are called stellar mass black holes, born one star at a time, scattered through the galaxy in numbers we are still patiently learning to count. They are real, and they are close, in the vast sense that anything is close among stars, and they are, on the scale of what is coming next, almost startlingly small. A doorway sized to a single dying giant, tucked into a corner of a much larger structure. Waiting. Picture one of them the way you might picture a single closet at the far end of an unfamiliar hallway. Real, present, its door closed, but easily walked past without a second thought if the rest of the house did not exist to give it context. That is what a stellar mass black hole is. On its own, a modest room, a private ending, one star's whole enormous life folded down to something you could, if scale allowed such a thing, hold cupped loosely between two hands. There are likely millions of them threaded through the galaxy's disk, each one the leftover doorway of a star that finished its work long ago. None of them reaching for anything. None of them any more dangerous, from a comfortable distance, than a closed closet door at the end of a hall you have no reason to walk down tonight. Because further along the same hallway, at the very center of our galaxy, there is a far larger room. We have given it a name that sounds almost domestic for what it holds: Sagittarius A. A black hole with the mass of some 4 million suns folded into a single point, its horizon a hush of space wide enough to hold within it not a city, but something closer to an entire orbit. A shadow you could tuck a small solar system's worth of quiet distance inside. Every star in the crowded core of the galaxy bends its path a little around this room without ever needing to enter it, the way every footstep in a house naturally curves around the room where someone is sleeping. It is not violent. It is not reaching for anything. It has simply always been there, at the center of the floor plan, holding its enormous stillness while an entire galaxy turns unhurried around it. And further still, out past counting, there are houses larger than that. Tone 619 is one of the largest such rooms we have found, a black hole so vast that its mass runs to tens of billions of suns, its horizon no longer comparable to a solar system, but wider than one. A threshold you could set an entire family of planets loose inside and still have room left over for the emptiness between them. Numbers this large stop behaving like numbers we use for anything else. They stop being something to hold in the mind the way you hold a distance or a weight, and start being something closer to a feeling. The feeling of standing at the doorway of a room so large that the far wall is simply not visible, and understanding, without needing to see it, that the wall is there, and that the room is finished, and that it has always known exactly how big it is meant to be. There is no need to picture the full number, the long unbroken string of zeros that tens of billions of suns actually represents. The mind was never built to hold a figure like that the way it holds a phone number or a birthday, and it does not need to. What matters is only the shape of the feeling that arrives once the number is simply allowed to be true. Something built on a scale so far past ordinary reckoning that measuring it against yourself stops making sense, the way it makes no sense to measure a single breath against the whole sky it rises into. You are not meant to hold Ton 618 in your mind. You are only meant to notice how it feels to stand near an idea that large without flinching, and to find that, oddly, you can. Here is the turn, and it is the gentlest one this house has to offer. All of that vastness, the stellar houses and the galactic one, and the truly enormous ones scattered farther out than starlight easily travels. None of it is a wall closing in. It is not a weight bearing down. It is, instead, an invitation to notice something almost obvious once it is said aloud, that being small inside something large is not the same as being unsafe inside it. It is closer to being held. Think of how a single warm room feels on a cold night, tucked deep inside a big old house, walls within walls, roof above roof, the whole sleeping structure standing between you and the weather outside. You do not feel smaller for being inside it. You feel, if anything, more allowed to close your eyes, because so much has already agreed to stand watch on your behalf. The size of the house is not a threat to the room. The size of the house is what lets the room stop working so hard. That is what all this scale is quietly offering, once you stop measuring it and start simply standing inside it. A black hole a few suns wide, 1/4 million suns wide, 1/10 of billions of suns wide. Each one a room within a still larger structure of galaxy and space and time, and every one of those structures agreeing, in its own patient way, to hold what is smaller than itself without needing anything from it in return. There is a certain kind of comfort that only shows up at scale. A single candle in an open field feels fragile. The same candle in a house with thick walls and a closed door and a roof holding back the whole night sky feels almost unreasonably safe, not because the candle changed, but because everything around it did. You, on this staircase, in this thread of a story, are something like that candle. Small on purpose. Small in a way that was never a flaw in the design, only a size chosen so that something enormous could hold it properly. The house was never built to make you feel little. It was built at that scale precisely so a little thing would have somewhere unhurried to rest. And perhaps that is the real use of numbers this large, not to overwhelm, but to give the mind a floor sturdy enough to finally stop bracing. When something is only a little bigger than you, you keep track of it, you watch it, you stay half alert. But when something is so much larger that your whole life could rest inside a fold of it, and it would not even notice the added weight, a different instinct takes over, older than worry. The instinct that lets a small animal sleep soundly at the base of a very old tree, or a child drift off in a house whose every creak has already been explained by someone bigger, awake somewhere down the hall. Scale, past a certain point, stops being frightening and starts being exactly the kind of shelter that lets the body finally set its guard down. So let the stellar ones be small doorways, glimpsed briefly from a great distance. Let Sagittarius A be the wide, patient center around which an entire galaxy of lights has learned to hum in its sleep. Let Ton 617 and its kind be the outer walls of a house so large that the very idea of an edge starts to soften and blur, the way a ceiling disappears into shadow just before your eyes finally close. None of them are waiting to take anything from you. They are simply large enough to make smallness feel, for once, like the safest size to be. But a house this old, standing through spans of time longer than any single sleeper could imagine, does not just hold its rooms, it keeps them. Every stair that was ever climbed, every step that has softly become part of the structure itself, leaves some trace behind in the walls, in the grain of the banister, in the quiet architecture of the place. And that raises its own gentle question, one worth carrying with you as the great house settles further into its stillness. Of everything this house has ever taken in across all its rooms large and small, what, if anything, does it keep? And if you are small enough to be held, small enough to rest inside something so vast, then it is worth asking, in the last drowsy corner of your mind, what a house like this keeps. Whether anything you gave it, a name, a shape, a history, is ever truly gone, or whether it only moves to a room you cannot see. This is the question the old astronomers call the information paradox. And it is less a puzzle to solve tonight than a thought to hold loosely, the way you hold the last page of a story before your eyes close on it. Physics has a rule, an old and stubborn one, that says information, the exact fingerprint of everything that ever happens, cannot simply vanish from the universe. A book can burn, but in principle, every atom of smoke and ash still carries, scrambled and faint, the shape of every word that was in it. So the question the house asks itself, in its own slow language, is whether a black hole burns its books completely or only rearranges them somewhere past reading. For a long while it seemed the house kept no records at all. Whatever crossed the threshold, starlight, dust, the imprint of a name, seemed to fall toward that far room and simply stop mattering to the rest of the universe, as if the last door in the hallway opened onto nothing, onto a place with no memory of the corridor that led there. This troubled physicists more than it might trouble you, half asleep, because it seemed to break something the universe had never broken before. Everywhere else, cause leaves a trace, a wave leaves ripples, a voice leaves an echo, however faint, however long it takes to arrive. Only here, at the bottom of the house, did it seem that a trace could simply stop being findable, not hidden, not scattered, but gone in a way nothing else in nature is ever quite gone. But even a sleeping house breathes, and it turns out black holes do too, in the faintest exhale imaginable. Their edges are not perfectly silent. Quantum theory, applied gently to the space right at a horizon, predicts a soft trickle of particles drifting outward, born from the trembling of empty space itself at that boundary. A whisper physicists call Hawking radiation, named for the mind that first heard it in the mathematics. A mind that spent long, quiet years listening to equations the way you might listen, right now, to your own breathing. It is unfathomably faint, colder in most cases than the space around it, than the last dying light of all the stars combined. Picture it less as a wind and more as the barest condensation on a cold window, appearing molecule by molecule, so slow you would need a lifetime, many lifetimes, simply to notice the glass had changed at all. But faint is not the same as absent, and over time, that trickle carries mass away. The house, ever so slowly, breathes itself smaller. Slowly is almost too small a word for how slowly. A black hole born from a heavy star would take far, far longer than the current age of the universe to lose any real weight this way. And the very largest, the ones at the hearts of galaxies, would need a span of time written as a one followed by more than 67 zeros of years just to fade at all, let alone finish. Say the number out loud in your head, unhurried, 10 at a time, and notice how quickly it stops feeling like counting and starts feeling like listening to something distant and continuous, a sound with no edges. Long after the last stars have gone dark, long after galaxies have drifted past speaking distance of one another, these great houses would still be standing, still exhaling that one faint breath at a time, patient past any patience a human night could imagine. Smaller black holes, the ones only a few times the mass of a sun, would finish their exhale sooner. Though sooner here still means far beyond any calendar you or your children's children will ever hold. It is less an ending than the longest, gentlest unwinding conceivable, a house so unhurried in its settling that it makes geological time look like a held breath. You are not meant to picture the end of it. You are meant only to feel how much time is folded into that single word, evaporation, and let the size of it become a kind of stillness in your chest. And here is the tender part. The part that eases the worry some people carry about all of this. If the house does eventually breathe itself away to nothing, physicists increasingly suspect that faint outgoing breath is not empty static. It may carry, encoded in its subtlest patterns, the very information that fell in long ago, not as a returned parcel, not as a decoded letter, but scrambled the way a whispered secret becomes scrambled passing through 100 sleepy listeners, true in principle, unreadable in practice, but never actually erased. Some theorists picture it differently still, and just as gently, that everything which ever crossed the horizon was never really lost inside a volume at all, but was written, all along, across the horizon's own surface, a two-dimensional skin holding a three-dimensional room's worth of memory, the way a single flat photograph can hold an entire remembered afternoon. This is the holographic idea, and you do not need to follow its mathematics to feel its comfort. It suggests that the walls of the house are not blank. They carry the memory of every stair that was ever climbed inside them, pressed into the plaster like a hand once laid flat against it, or a name once traced in a fogged window, faint but never entirely wiped away. Some researchers have even found, in the careful counting of how much a horizon's surface can hold, an echo of exactly the numbers needed to store everything that ever fell in, as if the house had, without announcing it, been keeping a ledger the whole time, written in a language of area and light rather than ink. Let the more adventurous ideas drift by tonight as just that, ideas, offered lightly. The way you might mention a half-remembered dream rather than swear to its details. Some theorists wonder whether the very center of the house is not a mathematical point at all, but something quantum gravity has not yet let us see clearly. A Planck star, perhaps. An unimaginably dense knot of matter that, freed from the limits of our current equations, might one day bounce, or settle, or simply persist in some quiet form deeper than our present physics can describe. No one insists on this. It is a bedtime possibility, not a verdict. One candle among several left burning at the far end of a hallway we have not finished walking. Other quiet guesses sit beside it, unranked, undecided, that the deepest room connects, somehow, to another house entirely, or that it simply asks a question our present mathematics is not yet fluent enough to answer honestly. None of them need to be chosen tonight. The truest thing that can be said now is simpler. The house may remember more than it appears to, in ways our best equations are still learning to read, and that not knowing is not the same as darkness. It is closer to a shape half seen at the edge of sleep, familiar in its outline, waiting patiently for a clearer light. It is worth pausing here on how strange and how tender it is that this question is even being asked at all, that creatures built from a few pounds of warm carbon, standing on a small stone circling an ordinary star, in a galaxy that is itself only a modest room among uncountable others, have managed to reach this far. You did not touch the horizon of any black hole to learn this. No one has. Every soft fact folded into tonight's staircase, the bending light, the slowed clocks, the shadow photographed in radio waves, the whisper of gravitational radiation crossing a detector on Earth, arrived instead as the faintest of signals, caught by patient instruments and even more patient minds, across distances so large that the light explaining them left before you were born. In some cases before your grandparents were born, in some cases before there were grandparents at all. That such a small, warm, sleepy species learned to listen that closely, that carefully, across that much silence, is itself something to feel gratitude for as your eyes grow heavy. A quiet, ordinary miracle, easy to forget. resting right alongside you in the dark. So how did such small watchers ever come to trust that any of this was true? Long before there were photographs of shadows or chirps of gravitational waves to confirm it. The answer reaches back further than you might expect, to candlelit studies and quiet observatories, long before anyone had a name for what they were beginning, gently, to imagine. And the answer to that question, how creatures as small as us ever learned any of this from so very far away, turns out to be its own kind of bedtime story. One made not of a single mind, but of many, each one setting a lamp down on the landing before turning in, so that the next mind climbing the stairs would have a little more light than the last. You can picture it that way if it helps you rest, not a single flash of understanding, but a lamp passed hand to hand up a long staircase, across more than 2 centuries, each keeper adding an hour of oil before letting the next take over. It begins long before anyone had a name for what we now call a black hole, with an English clergyman named John Michell sitting at a writing desk in Yorkshire in 1783, doing arithmetic by candlelight. He was thinking about light as if it were a thrown stone, obeying Newton's old, patient laws of gravity, and he wondered what would happen if a star were made massive enough, dense enough, that its own gravity could pull that thrown stone of light back down before it ever escaped. He called the idea a dark star, a body so heavy that its light could never reach an outside eye. It was a guess, built on the physics of his day, and it sat unread and unremarkable for well over a century, one lamp left burning low on an empty landing, waiting. Light traveled a long way before the next hand reached for it. In 1915, in a Europe already at war, Albert Einstein set down his equations of general relativity, a new grammar for gravity, one that described it not as a pull between objects, but as the shape of space and time themselves, curving wherever mass rested inside them. The equations were formidably difficult, tangled things, more geometry than arithmetic, and even Einstein doubted anyone would find an exact solution to them anytime soon. He imagined the search would take years of careful, patient labor by many hands. Someone did it in a matter of weeks, from the strangest of desks. Karl Schwarzschild, a German astronomer serving on the Eastern Front, worked out the first exact solution to those equations while stationed in the trenches, doing gravitational physics by lamplight between artillery postings, sending his results back to Einstein by letter carried through the ordinary military post, as though the shape of a collapsed star were simply another piece of news from the front. Schwarzschild's solution described, with unsettling precision, exactly the kind of object Michel had guessed at 130 years before, a radius around a mass at which light itself could no longer climb free. He would not live to see what his own arithmetic implied. He fell ill in the trenches and died within the year, but the number he found, the radius that still carries his name, the very measure that decides how wide the horizon of the house will be, kept quietly waiting on the page, another lamp set down on a landing he never got to climb back to. For a long while afterward, most physicists treated the Schwarzschild radius as a mathematical curiosity, an edge case, the kind of thing you note in a margin and move past, assuming nature was too gentle, too well behaved, to ever actually build such a place. It took the slow pressure of a dying star to change that assumption. In 1939, the physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, working with his student Hartland Snyder, published papers showing what happens to a massive star once it exhausts its fuel and has nothing left to hold itself up against its own weight. It does not merely dim, it collapses, falling inward on itself without limit. a house folding down into its own foundation faster than any signal can climb back out to say it happened. For the first time, the strange geometry on Schwarzschild's page had a story to be born from, not an abstraction, but an ending that real stars, heavy enough, are fated to reach. The idea sat with a kind of unfinished patience for another 3 decades, known to physicists, but still without a name that felt like it belonged in an ordinary sentence. It was the American physicist John Wheeler who, in the late 1960s, in a talk searching for plainer language, reached for 2 simple words and offered them to the world: black hole. The name stuck instantly, the way the right word does, because it let the strangeness travel outside the equations and into rooms where no one had studied Einstein at all, into classrooms, into conversations, eventually into the quiet of a night like this one. By then, the lamp was no longer only theoretical. In the early 1970s, X-ray telescopes lifted above the blur of the atmosphere caught a whisper from a source in the constellation Cygnus, called Cygnus X1, a faint, flickering hiss of high-energy light coming from what seemed to be an ordinary binary star system, except that one of the 2 partners was invisible and unreasonably heavy and was clearly pulling material from its companion into a hot, spiraling disk before that material vanished. It was the first strong evidence, gathered not by guesswork, but by instrument, that these folded places Michel had imagined and Schwarzschild had calculated and Oppenheimer had shown could form were not just possible on paper. They were out there, doing exactly what the equations said, lit faintly from the edge by the very material falling toward them. Then came a much longer, much lower kind of listening. For decades, physicists built instruments meant to catch not light at all, but ripples in space-time itself, gravitational waves. The faint trembling Einstein's own equations predicted, but which he himself doubted anyone would ever detect. So impossibly small was the effect. A disturbance thinner than a fraction of the width of an atom stretched across kilometers of vacuum and mirrors. In September of 2015, twin detectors on opposite sides of the United States caught one anyway. A chirp, rising in pitch over a fraction of a second. The unmistakable signature of 2 black holes, each dozens of times the mass of the sun, spiraling together and merging into one. A full billion years before the ripple ever reached us. For that entire journey, the signal traveled alone, unheard, outlasting the rise and fall of species, until 2 instruments built for exactly this purpose happened to be listening on the one morning it finally arrived. It was the sound, if you can call it that, of 2 houses becoming a single house, arriving at Earth as the faintest tremor in an instrument built to notice almost nothing at all, and noticing anyway. And then, finally, the patient decade of watching that gave the world its first picture. Beginning in the early 2010s, radio dishes on mountaintops and desert plains and ice sheets around the entire planet were linked together into a single virtual instrument nearly the size of the Earth itself, all pointed, in coordinated silence, at 2 very different targets. The enormous black hole at the heart of a distant galaxy called M87, and the black hole sleeping at the very center of our own galaxy, known as Sagittarius A star. It took years of gathering, calibrating, and painstakingly assembling the data before the first image was finally released in 2019. A soft ring of glowing light curved around a dark, unlit center, the shadow itself, the shape Schwarzschild had once described only in symbols, now visible as a photograph. The image of our own galaxy's black hole followed in 2022, taken from the very inside of the house we live in, a family portrait of the room at the center of our own home. 10 telescopes, dozens of countries, hundreds of scientists, 2 centuries of lamps set down one after another on the same long staircase, a clergyman's guess, a soldier's letter home, a physicist's collapse papers, a name that finally fit, a whisper of X-rays, a chirp of trembling space, and at last a photograph of a shadow. None of them saw the bottom. None of them needed to. Each one simply carried the question a little farther up the stairs and left it a little more lit for whoever came next, the way you might leave a small lamp burning on a landing for someone still climbing behind you in the dark. It is very late now, in the story and in the night, and somewhere on Earth, in this exact moment, one of those great dishes is finishing its watch, its instruments cooling, its recorded static already sliding into an archive to be read tomorrow by tired, careful eyes. The staircase you began climbing so long ago in this telling has, step after step, become the house entirely. And the house itself has gone still around you the way a home settles, once everyone inside it has finally stopped moving, the last door closed without a sound, the last light in a distant window dimming to almost nothing. Whatever waits at the very bottom of that great collapsed shape remains, for tonight, exactly where it should be, unfinished, unclaimed, safely out of reach. A question left resting on the landing for you to find again another time, whenever you next feel like climbing. Tonight has been about distance, the way it feels to stand at a safe remove and watch something enormous do nothing more alarming than bend a little light around itself. The way a lamp bends around its own glass. Tonight has been about descent, the long, unhurried kind, where a staircase turns and turns without once asking you to rush, where light stretched into low, reddened hums and time forgot to keep its usual pace. Tonight has been about arrival, about a bottom that was never a floor to begin with, about a staircase that finished its final turn and simply became the house around it, walls and ceiling and floor all at once, all built of the same hushed material, with nothing left to fall toward, because everything had already arrived. And tonight has been about memory, about what a house keeps of everyone who ever climbed its stairs, about warmth leaking outward in the faintest thread of light even from the deepest room, about how astronomers so far away, so patient, learn to read a house by the shadows it throws on a curtain none of us will ever touch. None of this needs anything from you tonight. Not one equation, not one number, not a single counted step. You were only ever asked to listen, and even that you're free to set down now, the way you set down a book at the very edge of sleep, pages still open, story unfinished. And that is completely all right. More than all right. The house doesn't need you to remember its floor plan. The staircase doesn't need you to count its turns. It simply continues on, winding downward long after you've stopped watching, long after your eyes have closed and your breathing has gone low, patient, and easy. Another quiet exploration is already waiting for you on the screen, its own staircase already built, its own long turn already beginning, and you don't have to do anything at all. Just let it begin on its own. Let the next voice pick up where this one leaves off, the way one dream hands itself over to the next, without either of you noticing the seam between them. Before you go, here is one small, lingering thought, nothing to answer, nothing to solve, only something to loosen into. If a staircase can become the very house it leads to, what has some room inside you already become, quietly, over the years, some place you built so long ago that you now simply live inside it without remembering you ever climbed toward it at all? Let that drift. You don't need an answer tonight. You never did. Feel the blanket settle a little further into the mattress beneath you. Feel the room around you grow a little dimmer, a little farther away. The way a house dims floor by floor as everyone inside it finally stops moving for the night. Your breath has found its own low rhythm by now, unhurried, undemanding, needing nothing from you but permission to keep going on its own. Somewhere far above you, starlight keeps arriving from places that stopped existing long before you were born, and it doesn't need you awake to keep arriving. It will be there tomorrow. The house will remain there tomorrow too. All of it will keep turning downward, landing by landing, without you, so that you don't have to lift a single thing. Let your eyes stay closed. Let the last thought of the night be small and soft-edged and unimportant. One stare, one turn, nothing more. There is nowhere left to descend to. You have already arrived, and the house is holding you. Sleep well.